Bittersweet memories, that is all. Do I wish I was HIV negative? I don't know anymore. At first I did. I wish I had never gotten it, but I would say that living with HIV has made me a much stronger person. It's led me to the work I do now. I've been able to help a lot of people.
Not often you meet people in life who leave a mark, not because of their success, but because they chose to keep going despite the odds.
I used to work in Jamaica, I used to work in Gambia, I used to work in Kenya. And the work I did overseas, a lot of different things. So I used to work as a teacher of the deaf. I also worked as a music teacher. I also worked as a photographer, doing stories about the LGBTQ community and mental health.
Our next guest, Justin Anantawan, isn't just resilient and compassionate. He also speaks hard truths and takes an unwavering stance on the issues that matter most. As part of our Library of Lived Experiences series, launched in collaboration with Ryan's Hope, we share powerful stories about resilient identity and finding strength in vulnerability.
Firstly, your responsibility is to educate yourself and learn. Because I think for people living with HIV, it's very tiring to have to educate people constantly.
Justin's life story is one of courage and conviction. Born to immigrant parents from Hong Kong and Thailand, he navigated life's complexity as a gay Asian youth growing up in Mississauga.
You know, when you're a gay Asian kid growing up, there's not a lot of places where you can really fit in properly, so that's how I felt growing up in Mississauga.
Openly living with HIV,
it really fucked me up for a while, still fucks me up to this day. There was a lot of anger because, again, I thought I was not supposed to get this, right? And what it did to me was, it made me feel gross and disgusting.
And dedicating himself to social work and advocacy around the world.
So that's how I think I deal with it too, just advocacy work and using my story and using my experiences to help others. That's what I think helps me to deal with it every day.
Today, Justin's voice and art uplift communities facing adversity, proving that our deepest struggles can transform into our greatest strengths. In a candid conversation at a Syrian farm in Tiny Township, generously hosted by Angela Voss, Justin opens up about his journey, speaking honestly about pain, healing, and transforming personal challenges into profound purpose.
Yeah, there's a lot of support, places you get support. So for example, there's the AIDS Committee of Toronto. I've been there, actually that was the first place I went to for counseling. And actually there's this counselor there named John Larson who really helped me.
This video is the first part in a two-part series. In the second part, we will join Justin and Angela in a thoughtful conversation about connection and shared experiences that bring meaning and hope. This is Justin's story about resilient identity and quiet yet powerful strength of continuing to show up every day no matter what.
Yeah, so this jacket's important to me just because it belonged to my grandfather. I forget so basically my mom, so I'm half Thai and half Chinese. My mom is from Hong Kong, and her mother, my grandmother, and her father, my grandfather, were alive during World War II. And at some point the Japanese were invading Hong Kong, and my grandfather was a truck driver. I think either for forget if it was the British or American Army or whatever, but yeah, this was his coat, his jacket, military jacket, and yeah, my mom gave it to me, and I love wearing it because it's kind of a reminder of my roots, and it's from Hong Kong and my family's legacy, and yeah, so I keep this around me. I never got to meet my grandfather. Met my grandmother, but she had Alzheimer's when she got here, so I didn't get to really know her deeply personally. But I loved my grandmother, and I never got to meet my grandfather, but I kind of keep this as a reminder of them, this jacket. So I was actually born here. I have two brothers, and we were all born here, but my mom came from Hong Kong to here, and my dad came from Thailand here, and I believe they came here, I think it was the 70s. Early 70s, I think they came here, and yeah, but I was born here, but my parents are immigrants, so I guess you call that first generation, I guess? Yeah, I'm first generation Canadian, I guess, yeah.
Let's go back then, start from the beginning.
Yeah, so my name is Justin Anantawan. So I live in Mississauga. Actually, I live in two places. So I live at my parents' house in Toronto, yeah, Mississauga. But I also live in my own apartment in Chinatown, Toronto. And it's great because in Chinatown, that's where Asian Community Aid Services is. So basically, I've been working there for, I think, around 5 years. I actually started there as an intern for social work school when I was in George Brown. But yeah, so I work at Asian Community Aid Services as a social worker. So at first, I got there, I actually started my first job at ACAS in HIV self-testing promotion. And then starting a year ago, I took on a new role as the BIPOC harm reduction coordinator. And so right now that's what I do. I work with Asian Community Aid Services as a harm reduction program coordinator. And again, like working at ACAS is very important to me because I'm actually HIV positive myself. And, ACAS has provided a space for me that's very welcoming and very accepting of me as a gay Asian man. But yeah, I do that. I also sing. I'm a singer. I actually busk on the street quite a bit in Toronto, in Chinatown. And actually when I sing, I sing to raise money for an orphanage in Kenya where I used to teach music and baking. Long time ago, 4 years ago I've been there. But yeah, so I do that. I busk on the street and I sing. And also when I sing too, I do a lot of singing about issues that are important to me. So I actually write music as well. And so like, for example, I've written songs that have been performed at AIDS vigils around Toronto, which is nice. I'm also a teacher. I used to be a teacher of the deaf in Africa, but I don't do that anymore. Used to be a music teacher. What else do I do? I'm also a student in Thai massage, so I'm learning how to do Thai massage right now, which is nice because I'm half Thai. Yeah, that's about all I do.
You said in Toronto you work for an organization called
ACAS, Asian Community Aid Services, so ACAS, yeah. Yeah, so what happened was in 2018 or 2019, I was in George Brown for social work, the diploma program, and I was actually supposed to do my internship at a HIV organization in Mississauga. But then about 1 month before I was supposed to start the internship, they basically told me, oh, you actually can't do it because we don't have a space for you to do this. I was like, okay. So I was kind of worried. So I was like, where else can I go? So I decided to ask Asian Community Aid Services, can you take me? And then it was a very last minute, but they took me on. And that's how I got involved with Asian Community Aid Services. It was through my internship. And kind of having another internship being kind of, ripped from my hands. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but yeah. Mississauga was interesting because, again, I went to a school that was a Catholic school, mostly white kids. My neighborhood was mostly white kids. I think it's changed now. There are more, people of color. But yeah, growing up, I grew up around a lot of people who didn't look like me. And also at the time, too, I think, it was a lot more homophobic, especially being in a Catholic school and being in the Catholic community. So yeah, my growing up in Mississauga was kind of like that. Basically kind of never feeling that I belonged. I mean, luckily there was a Chinese church community that I was part of, so that felt good. But growing up, yeah, I always felt, when you're a gay Asian kid growing up, there's not a lot of places where you can really fit in properly, so that's how I felt growing up in Mississauga. Maybe if I was growing up in Toronto where it's a little more diverse, maybe it would have been different, but definitely growing up in Mississauga, I grew up, feeling very much out of place. And to this day, it's very hard for me to feel like I belong anywhere. Yeah.
So if you are comfortable talking about it, how was your journey when you realized that you were gay?
It was difficult, definitely, because growing up, my family's a lot different now, right? But growing up, they weren't outright homophobic, but there are some things that they did which made me believe, if I were to come out to them, I wouldn't be able to. So for example, There was one point, for example, when they were trying to legalize gay marriage in, I think, Canada, and some conservative politician came to the church and said, we want you to sign a petition basically saying like we're against gay marriage and all that stuff, right? And my parents actually signed it at that time. So that was like, okay. And then,
do you remember how old were you at that time?
I forget, I was very young. But yeah, and then also too, like, I have two older brothers. They're both nice now, but I had a mean brother and a nice brother. And the mean brother actually would make fun of me, and he would actually encourage his friends to make fun of me in school as well. So basically, yeah, like it's growing up, it was set up for me from a very early age that, being gay is something that's not good. And at the same time too, going to Catholic school, they were very much against at that time as well too, and they still are, sadly, even though they say they're diverse, the Catholic board. But yeah, like a lot of things, like being at school, like just, constantly being bullied and being called gay because of the way I acted and stuff like that. And at that time I didn't even confess I was gay, but people just could tell, right? Because I guess maybe, I was a little bit more effeminate. I played with dolls, and I know, like, it's like stereotype, I know, but, just certain things about me and the way I talked and everything made people think, yeah, you're gay. So I was bullied all the time, but I always denied it. But basically it was very, very difficult. And because basically what happened was it just kind of created this whole feeling growing up that something's wrong with me. And like one of the worst things that happened to me that kind of fucked me up for a long time was like when I was around, I think 8 or 9 years old, I was actually sexually assaulted at my elementary school, the one I told you about, the Catholic one. And it was a bully who was it was basically a homophobic attack, basically. But yeah, he assaulted me. And I went to a teacher about it to tell him what happened. And the teacher basically told me, oh, it's okay, don't worry, it's nothing. And he never did anything about it. So that kind of traumatized me as a kid. And, and then also like interactions with like the Catholic priest also fucked me up. Not nice. He didn't, like, this priest didn't sexually abuse me or anything. I would say that I was in confession, my first confession, and I admitted something to a priest concerning sex and my sexuality and my developing sexuality. And he basically said some things to me, and I was a kid at the time. He said some things to me that made me feel very, very ashamed of being a sexual human being at all. And also too, growing up, I lived in a larger body. So, I to this day, I still have man boobs, I guess you can say. And my body has always been a little bit like curvier, I guess. And like I was bullied for that too, like especially by the mean brother, like but like he would say things that like you look gross and disgusting, whatever, because you have boobs and all that stuff. And when you're a gay kid, right, and then also as well, like you're being kind of being told that your body is too gay or too feminine, right? It traumatizes you. And so to this day, I live with the eating disorder as well, which I'm trying to figure out how to overcome, but it's very difficult. But yeah, so growing up in general, being gay, just the sum of everything, right, I think caused a lot of just shame and a lot of sexual trauma, right? Because when you are ashamed for your body reacting a certain way to the same sex, when you are ashamed of how your body looks, like it's not masculine enough, right? It does things to you. And so basically growing up gay and feeling I was ashamed of myself kind of messed me up. And so to this day, I still have a lot of trauma. Like even in high school, for example, like one of the things that was very hard was falling in love constantly with like some of my male classmates or, schoolmates. And then me not being able to say anything to them because I was gay and they were straight or whatever, or at least I thought they were straight. But I repressed my sexuality even through my teenage years for until I was 22, when I first came out to my mom. And but yeah, I repressed my sexuality. I didn't kiss anyone until I was like 21, 22. And I repressed myself sexually for years. And so, yeah, so just a lot of trauma. And then I came out, and, there was a lot of stuff. Came out to my mom first. She was the person in my family I came out to, and yeah.
How was that coming out to you?
Thankfully, very, very good. So by the time I was 22, I think my mom's viewpoints about homosexuality had changed. So when I told her, she said it was completely okay, which I was shocked about. And then my family were all okay with it.
Do you think they knew before?
Oh, of course. My mom, everyone knew. Like, everyone knew in my family, right? But yeah, like, when I told them, they were accepting of me, which I found very, very odd, because I didn't expect that from them. But I guess, again, from my childhood to the point I turned 22, they had time to evolve and learn more about the gay community and all that stuff. And so, yeah, when I came out, it was luckily, it was hard still, because at the time I came out, I was having a lot of issues with, the Christian church and being gay and everything. And I think I'm lucky that they didn't disown me and they accepted me, because I know a lot of other friends of mine, especially like, who lived overseas when I was working there, who when their parents found out, their community found out, their friends found out, they were completely ostracized, or they were like physically assaulted, or, so I'm lucky. Yeah. So I used to work in Jamaica, I used to work in Gambia, I used to work in Kenya. And the work I did overseas, a lot of different things. So I used to work as a teacher of the deaf. I also worked as a music teacher. I also worked as a photographer, doing stories about the LGBTQ community and mental health overseas. And by the way, all this stuff was, again, later, in my later years. By the time I was in my 30s, that's when I kind of started doing that kind of stuff. But yeah, I did a lot of stories. I've done a lot of like photojournalism around that. So basically meeting people who are part of marginalized communities and telling their stories, photographing them and getting their stories told on this mental health publication called One Day My World, and this LGBTQ publication called Where Love is Illegal. So I did a lot of that. I also used to work with South Sudanese refugee models in Kenya as a model scout, and I worked with them. And again, like, my model scouting work I didn't do it for the money. I did it more just because I saw people who had been through a lot, and they saw modeling as a way of like getting out of their situation. And I thought I could do that with them. Unfortunately, found out that the industry was very, very exploitative, and it didn't work out, and for a lot of them. So they ended up quitting the industry and becoming refugees in other countries, which was, better than being a model. But so I did that, and yeah, just a lot of just different things overseas. I used to actually also work in the gay community as an HIV outreach worker. Like, I would actually go online on Grindr, and I would actually meet men who wanted condoms or wanted referrals to a clinic or wanted information about PrEP or PEP, right? And again, overseas, like, there's a lot of, like, for example, in Kenya, there's a lot of homophobia, and the laws don't protect gay men there. So like, I was actually, and so because of that, a lot of men are afraid to go to the doctor or to get any kind of help. And so basically I would actually go online and meet men and, meet them in some location and have this like little bag of like condoms and, it was kind of funny because it's like people would assume that, if I'm like at the side of the road giving a mysterious package to someone, right, they would think, oh, is that like, is it like drugs or money or something that's illegal? It's just a bag of fucking condoms and lube, because men overseas were too afraid to even ask. In Kenya, we're too afraid to even ask for lube, right? And so like, yeah, a lot of my work was around all those different things. Yeah, I actually trained myself almost completely. I took one class at, I think, was it George Brown? I think I took one introductory class to George Brown, but everything else, yeah, but that's the only real formal training I've got, but everything else has been my own learning, by myself. So basically, remember I told you that I never felt like I belonged in Canada? So basically, I think being a gay person, firstly, yeah, probably that's a lot of it. Like, I always grew up with this feeling of not really fitting in anywhere. And so I always knew, I always felt this emptiness growing up, that I just never felt like I belonged in Canada, and so what happened? I'll tell you what happened. So my wanderlust, I guess you can call it. About my wanderlust started when I was in my grade, the summer before grade 12, high school. I was in the library, and I used to love reading books from Oprah's book club. And the book I found on the shelf one day, randomly, one summer, was called The Poisonwood Bible. And the Poisonwood Bible was about a white missionary family that worked in the Congo, like their whole journey through that. And again, like, looking back on it now, like, it was basically a book about, colonialism and all that stuff. And it wasn't a bad book, actually, luckily. Like, there are a lot of books made about, people living in Africa who are not from Africa that tend to be a little bit, like, very racist or, very problematic, but this book wasn't bad. Anyways, but I read this book and I was like, whoa, interesting story. Africa, the Congo, sorry. But again, in my mind back in the day, a lot of people did this too, like just lumping Africa into one big thing, which is not as many different countries. But I just thought to myself after reading this book, I really want to go to Africa one day. Originally, my first place I was supposed to go, I think it was 2 or 3 years later, was supposed to be Sierra Leone to volunteer with a Sierra Leonean priest there. But that never happened. And then what happened was I was in church one day and I met someone who had actually had a cousin or nephew who had volunteered at an orphanage in Kenya. And she told me about this and I learned about the orphanage. And then from there, I was like, I want to go to this orphanage. So I found out about it. Made the arrangements and went to this orphanage. First time I'd actually, other than going to the US a few times and then also going to Hong Kong when I was like a little baby, going to Kenya was the first time I'd really been outside the continent, right? And it was very, volunteering at this orphanage, I was volunteering as a music teacher and kind of just seeing what these kids had been through. Like a lot of the kids had run away from like forced marriages or sexual abuse or, living on the streets and experiencing addiction to drugs and a lot of these kids had lost parents to AIDS and a lot of these kids were HIV positive themselves. Just kind of being in that environment and seeing what they had been through and then seeing that how like teaching them music, kind of brought some joy into their life. It was from there then I was like, I want to continue working overseas, because basically like for the first time these orphans were so unconditionally loving towards me, and having grown up not feeling that I deserved any kind of love and having them just love me healed me in many ways, and so from then on I was like, I guess from that experience I just kept on going back to overseas. So ended up working in Kenya and Gambia and then Jamaica, not part of Africa, but overseas in the Caribbean. I just kept on going overseas because whenever I was working overseas, supporting communities and doing work that, because again, like overseas, because of like the effects of the colonialism, there's a lot of, after effects of that, right? In terms of social injustice and poverty and war and all those different things. And I felt like going overseas that, Canada doesn't mean me. There's nothing wrong in Canada. Everything's so privileged here, right? Because I felt a need to find myself useful. That's why I kept on going overseas, because I would work overseas and people would appreciate me mostly. And that's how I kind of found self-love and validation being overseas. So that's why I kept on going overseas, because I felt like, I didn't belong here. And then when I finally went overseas, I found a place where I felt like I belonged for many years. And I did that, going back and forth between here and Canada for 15 years. Like at one point, I actually stayed 2 years in West Africa and Gambia, teaching at a school for the deaf. but yeah, that's how I got into it. Just trying to find myself, right? Yeah.
So what is the one thing that you really enjoyed
Being overseas.
overseas?
Just meeting people. I think the thing about me, it's really strange, because again, I think because growing up I was so lonely, and to this day I still feel very lonely. Going overseas and meeting people from a different world who I felt appreciated me, I guess. Yeah, that was probably the thing I loved about it most, just feeling that I was appreciated, I belonged somewhere, right? I think too, the reason why I got comfort being overseas was because, here in Canada, right, there's this feeling that because I'm Canadian, I should feel like I belong here, right? Which then creates that whole dichotomy between, seeing people who belong and then me not having any belonging, right? But then when I was overseas, because I was completely different from everyone there, me not belonging felt different. It felt less of, I don't belong here, but now it felt more like, oh, you're different, you're exotic, you're interesting, right? And I think I enjoyed that, just kind of being in a space where I didn't belong, but it was okay because there was no way I could completely fit in anyways, right? So that's why I probably loved most about being overseas. Being overseas too, I think I really just enjoyed learning about people's stories and learning about people's lives, and because I've always been a very curious person, I think. And yeah, just like I got to overseas kind of just very much I got to satisfy my cravings for learning more, because I think curious people like me, yeah, we crave new experiences, and that's what I felt overseas all the time. Yeah.
The next question is, it's totally up to you whether to answer or not, and maybe I will learn something as well. About when did you come to know that you were HIV positive?
Yeah, so basically, so I was in Gambia for 2 years at a school for the deaf, and it was actually there that I met somebody. And I met him very, very early on in those 2 years. But basically this person transmitted the virus to me. And I don't know if he did it on purpose. I don't think he did, because I think what happened was he probably didn't know. And I always used condoms, basically. But I think maybe something happened where either he stealthed me, I think, where I didn't know, but he took off the condom without telling me. Or maybe the condom broke and I didn't know, he didn't know. Like, I still don't know completely what happened. But basically, because what happened was I was with this person who turned out to be a complete jerk, by the way. And I didn't, after about dating him for about a month or two, I just stopped talking to him. But basically, he was the first person in Gambia who I kind of dated for a bit and slept with. And shortly after meeting him and kind of fooling around with him, I had like a really horrible flu, which I didn't know what it was, but it was like the worst flu of my life. But I just assumed I'm in a new climate, new place, and just assumed it was nothing. 2 years later, get back to Canada, and then on July 4th of all days, it was I think it was a Tuesday or something, I went to the clinic to get testing, and then found out I was HIV positive. And when I found out, I was very devastated, just because I thought I'd done everything to not get HIV, and then I did anyways. And so that's how I found out. It was basically in 2017. I think the virus got transmitted to me in 2015, then I got diagnosed in 2017. And what happened was, after that happened, I basically contacted everyone who I'd been with, and they all tested it, got negative. The only person who didn't respond to me was that one guy. And then lo and behold, years later, he's dead. I found out. He got sick. And so I'm like, So basically my assumption is that maybe he died of AIDS. But again, like it's I don't know. But yeah. But that's how I found out. in 2017, and it was a journey. Like about a year later, it took me about a year to come to terms with it. I actually came to terms with my HIV diagnosis in Jamaica, of all places, and it was a very interesting experience coming to terms with my diagnosis. But basically, yeah, like my diagnosis day was July 4th, and every year I celebrate it now as another year of making it through this diagnosis, you know? But yeah, that's how I found out I was HIV positive, and then I was in Jamaica some time later, a year after my diagnosis, and it was there that I kind of came to terms with what had happened to me. Yep.
So, what kind of effect it had?
It really fucked me up for a while. Still fucks me up to this day. There was a lot of anger because, again, I thought I was not supposed to get this, right? And what it did to me was, you know, it made me feel gross and disgusting, right? Like, I've always had issues with my body, right? You know, and you know, it's really hard to grow up in hating your body because your body is what apparently made you get sexually assaulted, right? The fat on your body is what made people abuse you and bully you, right? So I always had this shame about my body already. But then after getting diagnosed with HIV, it was even worse. Like, I remember about 2 or 3 weeks after I got diagnosed, I was talking to myself and I called myself like a dirty animal. And I thought to myself, so basically having HIV made me hate my body even more, you know, because here I am and I've already been, you know, stigmatized by society for being gay. And now on top of that, now I'm being discriminated against within my own community, in the gay community, for being HIV positive. You know, so it kind of just shrinks your whole world, where you just feel unlovable, you know. And so HIV, I mean, it's HIV in many ways has actually strengthened my mental health, because when you have to be resilient and deal with stigma, especially in the dating world, you have to learn. You know, I used to get really hurt when men would reject me for being HIV positive. I would cry. I would think I should just kill myself and all that stuff, like, you know. But nowadays, when it happens all the time still, right? Men still, you know, discriminate against me all the time for being HIV positive. But I've just come to a point now, I'm like, okay, you know, if you don't want me, you don't want me. I'll find someone else who wants me. Not a lot of men want me. Like, I've come to the acceptance that my chances of getting married, having a partner, is probably like 1%, you know, considering me being HIV positive, because 99% of men don't want to be with me or talk to me or anything, right? But I've come to accept that. And I tell myself, well, you know, probably won't find a partner in my life, but that just means I got to be strong and learn to love myself and find love wherever I can find it, right? But yeah, like, living with HIV, you basically come to a point where you build defenses in your own mind to deal with the loneliness and the rejection, right? Because I experience all the time, and I still feel sad sometimes, but not nearly as sad as I used to. Because when you go through 7 years of this, you build a tough skin, you know? So does it still make me sad and depressed having HIV? Yes. But I've just come to a point where I've learned to accept myself, and I find little bits of love where I can find it. I'll tell you that overseas, men accept me a lot more than here, right? I'm accepted a lot more as an HIV positive person overseas than here. And that's actually one of the reasons why I also kept on going overseas after my diagnosis, because for a while, the only place I found I could find acceptance was overseas for being HIV positive, right? You know, but yeah, like, having HIV makes you really hate yourself. Because when people don't love you or don't want you because of your status, and you learn not to love yourself and not want yourself either, you know, couple that with the shame of being gay growing up, and then throw that in, you know, it's you know, it's very difficult. But I'm a very, very strong person. Like, you know, there are many times I've wanted to kill myself. To this day, I still feel suicidal a lot. Sometimes because of HIV, because I think to myself, there's no hope for me. to find true love, I guess, sometimes. And I feel very lonely. But at the same time, I take score of all the people who do love me, you know, and that helps with my mental health. Just kind of taking inventory of all the goodness and love in my life despite living with HIV. Yeah.
So when we were just walking in, you just looked around all the trees and then you just like burst with a big smile.
Mm-hmm.
You're just like so happy to be
Yeah.
out here. So can you just little bit, we're out of Toronto here in tiny township.
I feel relieved because, again, like all the time, right? Like basically with my mental health issues, like for example, like I think about killing myself every day, basically. That's a part of my depression. Like I'm always sad, basically, right? And a lot of that sadness, I would say, comes from the environment of being in Toronto, right? Again, like when you're in the gay community there and like men don't want you, you know? You know, and also too, like just like, I don't know, there's something about being in Toronto too, right? Like, cause I think I've done so much of my advocacy work there around HIV and harm reduction. Like in Toronto, I've encountered a lot of people are just kind of shitty. You know what I mean? And when you have a higher concentration of shitty people in Toronto, for example, then you want to find places to get away from it. So when I come here, I mean, there's probably shitty people in tiny as well. But maybe there's just less of them because of the slower population. So maybe that's why I'm so happy to come here, because I kind of temporarily escape like from my own shit in Toronto. But that being said, I love nature. Like I just love the trees, I love the sky. Like one of the things I used to love about being in Kenya, for example, was I used to visit a family there, a Maasai family, and they lived like on the plains, right? Like in nature. And I just remember like I would wake up in the morning and just see like endless fields ahead of me and hills and just so much beauty and so much quietness. And that quietness is sometimes, a lot of times is where I find my center, right? And so whereas in Toronto, the way I can get my quietness usually and feel very alone is like in my mind through meditation and being in my dark room and just meditating, right? You're still aware though that in Toronto, you're still surrounded by a shit ton of people and there's a lot of bad energy and a lot of people, right? But here, it's like everything's just spread out. And so going back to what I was talking about in Kenya, like being in the landscape and being with nature and away from people, right? Nature can't harm you. I mean, unless it's like a tsunami and a tornado or an earthquake, whatever. In general, nature takes care of you. Nature unconditionally loves you unless unless of course it's a hurricane or whatever, as a natural disaster, as I said, or maybe like a bear comes after you and tries to kill you or something like that. Like other than that, like nature's, or maybe the water's like poisoned or whatever. Actually, wait, now I'm thinking that, damn. Okay, anyways, but in general, nature is pretty calming. And so when I see these trees, right, it's just like the green and everything, and just the space and hearing the trees and the wind blowing through the trees and like hearing the birds chirp and everything, it's very calming. So that's why I love being up here. It's an escape, and it's like being embraced by all loving, unconditional love of Mother Nature. Yeah.
You talked about the person who might have, given you the virus.
Yeah.
He has died.
Yeah.
You also talked about there's a lot more stigma.
Yeah.
In other countries. I'm from India, so I have a lot more stigma in India as well.
Mm-hmm.
A lot less resources. So how do you compare, the gay community or the people living with HIV in Canada?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of support they get?
Yeah. So it's kind of like a weird situation in which, like, okay, so for example, I would say here in Canada, right? So there's pros and cons, right? So in Canada, because we're, I guess, quote unquote, a developed country, and there's more funding and everything, right? So like if you're HIV positive in Canada, right, there's a lot more resources per se, right, that you can have access to, right? But the problem is that, especially in the gay community, right? So HIV rates in Canada, since, for example, the 80s and the 90s, have gotten a lot lower, because of advances in drugs and protection, all that stuff. And so because of that, like a lot of the gay men in Toronto have less experience and and a lot of them don't even know friends who are living with HIV. So when you're living in this like little bubble where HIV seems like a thing of the past, but people are still afraid of it, and they're not confronted with it from people they know, it creates a lot of stigma. Because firstly you think, oh yeah, HIV doesn't exist, and if it does exist in somebody, then then I gotta avoid them, right? Because they could give it to me, right? So that's what happens in the gay community. Like less men know other men are HIV positive, right? And so because of that, there's that. Also, the thing about Canada too is like HIV drugs here are ridiculously expensive. So for example, I can't afford to get drugs unless I have insurance, or if I go on the Trillium drug plan, right? So there's that. So being overseas, I was accepted a lot more within the gay community because, and actually one of my friends in the Caribbean told me about this because I talked to him, asked him, why is it that I feel like I belong more overseas in the Caribbean, like in Jamaica? Like men in Jamaica mostly did not discriminate against me. Like why do I feel more at home here? Why do they not discriminate against me as much as here in Canada? He told me that, so for example, like in Kenya, Gambia, and Jamaica, all those three places, the HIV rates amongst gay men are very, very high. So for example, in Gambia, I used to work with ActionAid, and they basically told me that 50% of gay men in Gambia have HIV. So going back to my friend from the Caribbean said, so the reason why that happens because Jamaica, Kenya, and Gambia, there are not like laws that protect gay people, right? And because of that, more men are reluctant to see a doctor to get help, to be on their drugs that they need to stay healthy. Because for example, I think like people are living with HIV. If we take our meds every day, our viral load gets so low it becomes undetectable. And when it's undetectable, it cannot be transmitted. So undetectable equals untransmittable. So for example, if I were to have unprotected sex with somebody right now, I wouldn't be able to give them the virus, right? Because I'm undetectable. Take my drugs every day. But basically, but overseas, right, because of the situations that I just talked about, more men are living with HIV, more gay men are living with HIV. And so when that happens, you tend to know other friends who are living with HIV. And because you're confronted with that, you're forced to learn about HIV. You're forced to learn about things like U equals U, which I told you about, which then helps destigmatize HIV. So that's why overseas I think I was accepted more, just because more men, there's higher rates of HIV, and when you have higher rates of HIV, you're forced to contend with it more, and when you're forced to contend with it, you learn more. And then you learn things like that I just told you. Unfortunately, in Canada, that doesn't happen as much because men just bury their heads in the sand. Like to this day, even like last week, 3 different men messaged me, right? Because they didn't read my profile. And then when I told them to read my profile, they blocked me. Because like, oh, he's HIV positive. He's scary now, So in Toronto, whereas overseas I'm kind of like accepted, here in Toronto I'm kind of seen as like this monster, in a way. Men don't want me here.
So how do you take it like one day at a time?
I deal with it through basically just a lot of techniques that I've learned to regulate my own emotions. Because basically, like, the hard part about, being part of all these different identities that are marginalized is that you learn to hate yourself. And then whenever something happens that reminds you of why you should hate yourself, you get triggered, right? And whenever I get triggered, my nervous system goes completely out of whack. Like sometimes I'll have a panic attack, or I'll have suicidal thoughts, or I'll get really depressed and go into a shutdown mode. So whenever those things happen, I just always constantly have to, I do a lot of meditation, for example. So when I get those thoughts and feelings, I do that. Also, I find my supports, right? So luckily at ACAS, for example, like there are a lot of people who are gay, Asian, HIV positive. I get support from there, right? And then, so that's how I deal with it. I find my own community, which is, not the biggest, but yeah, there's that. Also meditation, but also I think the way I deal with it is just being an activist. Like I'm very open about my HIV status. Like I was actually in a documentary about it years ago. And I think just speaking out on it and kind of being open and not hiding myself helps me a lot. Because like a lot of shame is bred within secrecy, right? And I'm not saying that every person who's HIV positive should be open about it, right? But I wish we lived in a world where we didn't have to hide it. Because, for example, if you have diabetes, you don't hide it and say like, oh, I'm a bad person because of it, right? But when you're HIV positive, people just think, oh, you're promiscuous, you're dirty, you know, I can't have babies with you and all that stuff. Like, people who are HIV positive can have babies all they want if they're on their meds and they're unsexable. You can't give it to the baby, right? But yeah, I've just kind of learned to just be open, because I think for me, like, again, do I wish I was HIV negative? I don't know anymore. At first I did. I wish I had never gotten it, but I would say that living with HIV has made me a much stronger person. It's led me to the work I do now. I've been able to help a lot of people, I think, through being open with my story, you know? So that's how I think I deal with it too, just advocacy work and using my story and using my experiences to help others. That's why I think helps me to deal with it every day. Because I realize I get blocked all the time in Grindr and men don't want to be with me. Like, I'm very much like hated within the gay community. But I take comfort in the fact that I use these experiences to help others. You know, and I think that's what I've done a lot of my life, I think. And it's maybe not the best coping mechanism, but a lot of the ways I've dealt with my sense of worthlessness and my hatred towards myself, my sadness and my emptiness is helping others, supporting other people, right? It brings me fulfillment. I am aware that, you know, it's not a good crutch, because then I feel like I depend on my work to feel worthy. That being said, though, yeah, that's what's helped me a lot doing the work that I do. You know, because I meet a lot of other people. For example, like when I was overseas in Kenya, for example, I put on my profile on Grindr HIV positive, right? And this one guy, I don't want people to think, right, there's no HIV stigma overseas, because there is, right? But it's just less for me. Also, maybe because like maybe my skin color overseas changes things. I'm called a white man in Kenya, a mzungu, so that gives me privilege. But yeah, like for example, like when I was in Kenya, like there was quite a few times some men would message me and say, you're like the first person I saw on Grindr who's open with this status. Thank you. You know? So if through being open, I can help others, that helps my mind, you know? Because there's some good that comes out of something that's very difficult to deal with. Yeah. Firstly, your responsibility is to educate yourself and learn. Because I think for people living with HIV, it's very tiring to have to educate people constantly. Like even like if you want to hook up on Grindr, right? It's like that whole fucking spiel. Like, did you read my profile? Did you know that I can't give you HIV? It's exhausting. The thing is, like, just acceptance, like love people. Because I think a lot of people living with HIV, we often feel like we're not lovable. So probably the biggest thing you do other than educating yourself is loving somebody who lives with HIV, listening to their story, telling them that they're okay just as they are. You know, because it's shame of living with HIV, for example, that often makes people not want to take their meds. When people don't take their meds, they have the virus, they can spread to someone else. Ironically, people think that ostracizing people living with HIV and stigmatizing them will, like, you know, protect the general society from this virus, right? It doesn't. Because when you do that to people, they don't want to get help. They don't want to disclose their status even, right? Like, you're much safer, for example, having sex with a person that's HIV positive who's undetectable and can't spread it to you, and they know their status. It's much safer than to have sex with someone who doesn't know their status, right? But says they're HIV negative. And a lot of people don't even want to get tested because they're too afraid that if I find out I'm positive, ruin my life, right? Stigma makes HIV worse, right? And it's a fucked up logic, right? That you make things better and decrease rates of a virus by demonizing the people who have it. That just makes it absolutely worse. And I think what annoys me is that, like, for example, like I don't feel like a lot of, like, for example, like I feel like the HIV education in Toronto and in Canada in general was always like geared towards gay men, right? Because I think within that's where the highest um, HIV rates are, I think. Maybe it's for trans women. I forget now, but yeah, it's like basically like that population. But then when you just target all your information towards that population, then the rest of society still knows nothing. Like for example, like there's this one time I was working with a model, and we went out to dinner, and he told me that, you know, if I would never be able to date a woman who has HIV, right, or have a relationship with her because I can never have babies with her. And I had to explain to him, no, you actually can, you know, because if she's HIV positive, then, you know, and she's on her drugs, then she can't give you the virus. Like I remember other things, this was only like 5 years ago, literally 5 years or 4 years ago, whatever. I was working with a makeup artist who basically told me that she was afraid of HIV because, you know, if you have HIV, even if you're on your meds, you eventually die anyways, no matter what. This was only 5 years ago. And this girl was still thinking that, and these are straight people, right? So I honestly think like straight people in Canada especially, and a lot of gay men who don't really know any other men who are HIV positive, like they're completely fucking ignorant about all this stuff. Is it their fault? No. Do they act like assholes though? Yes. I mean, you can unintentionally act like an asshole and discriminate against people living with HIV. You know, but I don't think the government or education system is doing anything really to educate people. Like even like schools, like in the school system, they almost never talk about HIV. Or if they do, it's from this very like fear-based stance, right? Like use condoms, abstinence, right? You know, they don't talk about undetectable. They don't talk about treatment. They don't talk about life with HIV. All they talk about is prevention. They don't fucking talk about living with HIV, that you can live and live a great life. Because despite living with HIV, I've lived a pretty damn good life, I would say. You know, I mean, again, as I said, like I live with a lot of different mental health challenges, but you know, I haven't killed myself yet. Hopefully I won't. I don't want to do that. I think about it all the time because I get so sad. But at the same time, you know, I'm still here. And I think I'm still here for a reason. I mean, I'm talking to your camera now for a reason. I don't know how many people are going to, you know, listen to this story or hear it, but, you know, but it's stories like these and this kind of activism that's important to me, right? Because I told you, right, there's so much ignorance. And if I can be open and tell more people about this and hopefully help other people in the future, then it's a good thing. You know, because I'm hoping that maybe 20, 30 years from now, maybe the next generation of people living with HIV will have a much better time from me, or maybe there'll be a cure at that point. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of support, places you get support. So for example, there's the AIDS Committee of Toronto, and that's located at, like, I think Wellesley and Yonge in that area, but it's I think it was one of the first AIDS organizations in Toronto, actually, but that place is great. I've been there, actually that was the first place I went to for counseling, and actually there's this counselor there named John Larson who really helped me at the beginning of my diagnosis. I was actually part of a couple support groups there too. That helped me a lot. So ACT is one of them, AIDS Community Toronto. They have like a youth group as well. They have like condom stuffing parties where people from the community get together and just stuff condoms and have lunch together, right? That's a place where a lot of people living with HIV get support at ACT. Another place where people get support is called People Living with AIDS Foundation, PWA. I forgot the name completely. PWA, People with, I forget. Anyways, but that place is great. So it's another organization where people living with HIV can go to get free haircuts. I think they also do have a food bank there. They have like an annual like Christmas gift hamper thing they do. I think they have like a picnic every year too for people living with HIV. So places like that's a place too people go to quite a bit. That helps people living with HIV. And then again, you have a lot of the cultural specific organizations. So for example, there's ACAS, which focuses more on the Asian community. You have ASAP, which focuses on the South Asian community, the people living with HIV. There's Black Cap, the Afro-Caribbean community. I don't know the right term for that, but you know, so there's a lot of different organizations. Right. There's also like I think the Ontario HIV Legal Network, and they actually help people living with HIV in terms of like legal things. There's Casey House, which is basically a hospice for people living with AIDS, I believe. But they also do like a lot of programming, right? A lot of group programming that helps that for social programming there for people living with HIV. So there's actually a lot of organization in Toronto, you know. But again, like not a lot of people know about them just because unless you're like part of that world, right? Unless you're really part of like, I guess like the LGBTQ community, which that's those HIV organizations serve a lot, or if you're not part of the PHA community, like those are like organizations you don't really hear about as much, right? But they're out there, you know, because HIV is still a thing. Also CanFAR. Yeah, I forgot to tell you, I'm actually an ambassador for the Canadian Foundation for AIDS Research. That organization is really great. They actually like raise money for research to find for AIDS research, you know. CanFAR is really good. They always have like a lot of different like events and fundraising events, and even like just like social events where like people living with HIV can meet up too, right? For fun. What do I do for fun? I sing a lot. I love to sing.
Any favorite singer?
Whitney Houston. And I will always love you. Like I love that song.
Can you sing a couple of more lines?
Bittersweet memories, that is all I'm taking with me. So goodbye, please don't cry. We both know I'm not what you need, and I will always love you. I'm not singing very well right now, but yeah, so I sing a lot. I love Whitney Houston. Other things I do for fun. I like to watch like a lot of like crime documentaries for some reason. Like I don't know why that appeals to me. Like it's kind of gruesome actually, like watching a lot of murder documentaries. But don't worry, folks. I'm not going to do anything. But I find it like Netflix. I always find those like crime documentaries really cool. I love walking everywhere. Like I can go for like a 2-hour walk. It's nothing for me. Like I love walking, like especially like on trails or walking through like cities that I've never been to. I also love things I do for fun too, like when I can, like sex. I also like, substances. My main two substances are just shrooms and cannabis. Cannabis, I don't, kind of want to do less of it, but whatever. That's a whole other journey. Love exercising. I just love going to the gym. Kind of keeps myself together in a way. I really enjoy talking to people, I think. It's really funny because I think like if I go to a party, I fucking hate parties. Like I fucking hate going to anything with a lot of people, right? Because I just clam up. I go to a corner by myself. I'm very, very shy. People, like it's funny, when I'm one-on-one with someone, I'll just talk for ages, like nonstop. But when it comes to like parties and a lot of people, I get very shy and I don't want to talk. And I just like, people actually sometimes think I'm like not a nice person because like sometimes I'm very standoffish in that sense if I don't feel comfortable in a situation. But like put me in a like one-on-one situation with someone, I'll just talk for ages. So I actually love talking to people. Like that's one of the things I just love doing, just meeting people and talking to them and learning their story, having a coffee with them, yeah. So those are some fun things I like to do. Oh yeah, also aquariums. Like I have 3 aquariums. I love aquariums. Like there's just something very beautiful about having a lot of fish and creating like a little ecosystem, that you can kind of control. It makes you feel like God. But I love aquariums. Like I spend way too much money on like my little aquarium hobby, but it's great. I mean, if there's any hobby that you want to spend money on, then that's probably a good one to spend money on, So yeah, that's it. Bittersweet memories, that is all I'm taking with me. So goodbye, please don't cry. We both know I'm not what you need.